Hello YouTube and preppers, this is the Columns Prepper with my third video on my playlist series on the Morningstar TS-MPPT-60 charge controller. In the first video we did the hardware pre-configuration settings on the dip switches. On the second video we set up communications between our personal computer and the charge controller to make sure we could communicate with the device to do the custom programming. And now we're at the third video where we're actually going to program in our own custom settings. As we discussed in previous videos of the playlist, my configuration out at the retreat location, I have 4 Trojan T105RE flooded lead acid batteries configured in a 12 volt battery bank, and my Trojan batteries call for some very specific voltages for the absorption, the float, and the equalization stages. Now looking here at Morningstar's chart for their pre-configured charging parameters, there's 7 of them. 1 for gel, 2 for sealed, the number 3 is sealed as well, AGM flooded, 5 is flooded, 6 is flooded, and 7 is the L16 battery line. These voltages don't exactly align with my configuration at the retreat location or my Trojan T105RE batteries, which is why I was drawn to the Morningstar charge controller, because to their credit they actually have an 8th field where you can program in custom settings for your own specific configuration. And that's what we're going to do here in this video, is we're actually going to program the custom settings for the charge controller to match with what I have out at the retreat location. So we'll go ahead and minimize this manual, and we're going to run the MSView program here that we downloaded in video number 2 from Morningstar's websites. We're going to search for devices, and there's our charge controller already connected. There's a Cat5 cable between the charge controller and the network card on my computer. We'll go ahead and connect to that device. The device connected here, and we're going to go into Tools, and we're going to start the MPPT setup wizard. We'll get our 2 warnings, we've seen that before, and we're going to create a new file. So our first screen here is the MPPT mode. We're going to select solar, not wind. We'll go to our next screen here, and this is our absorption voltage setting page. My Trojan batteries require 14.8 volts for absorption or bulk or daily charge. The typical standard on a charge controller is absorption charge time is about 2 hours. I have a smaller array, so I'm going to go ahead and increase this to 2 hours and 30 minutes. A nice feature with this charge controller is if you run your batteries down really low the night before and get to a low state of charge, let's say to the 60 or the 50% mark, you can actually check this feature off and add an extra bit of time to your absorption charge time to get those batteries back up to a healthy state of charge. So I'm going to leave this at the 12.27 because that's the 60% mark on the Trojan line, but I'm not going to add 3 hours to it. I'm actually going to give this an extra 30 minutes if we ever hit this floor. Temperature compensation, I'm going to leave this alone because we'll discuss that in a separate video. Battery service reminder, maybe if you have several industrial locations you might need this, but for one single off-grid location I'm going to disable that feature. Enable float voltage. For the float voltages on the Trojan, we require 13.2 volts, so I'm going to change that. Enable float cancel. I'm going to disable this. This is a feature that Morningstar Tech Support said is pretty nice in the winter time where you don't get a lot of sunlight, where if your batteries start getting low you can set another threshold, a low state of charge threshold, and actually trigger the charge controller to skip any float for the following day and just stay in the absorption mode. But since I'm installing this weekend, it's summertime, I'm going to disable that feature. Equalization. If you have flooded lead acid batteries, you have to do equalization. For the Trojan product line, they want 15.5 volts for equalization, so we'll change that. Trojan doesn't specify time, but again, the standard seems to be 2 hours out there, so I'm going to go ahead and change that to 2. And then enable battery high voltage disconnect. I spoke with the technicians at Morningstar and they said I really don't need this because I only have one charge controller on the system, so I don't have to worry about another controller exceeding a voltage level in the system. So I'll go ahead and disable that. Enable maximum regulator limit. This feature here you can set to cut off the PV panels to the system and shut the charge controller down to protect anything you have protected to your battery bank, like an inverter. Let's say there's a ceiling on your inverter. It'll operate from 11 volts to 15 volts. You could actually come in here, let's say, and set this to the 15.1 volts. And if some other power source or another power array or wind generator or something was raising the power level up above what your loads could handle, this would disconnect that for you. So this is a neat feature. I don't need it because I have a DC switch on my only inverter. So I actually shut the inverter off before I go into equalization mode. So I'm going to disable that. We'll hit next. These lights here, this kind of gives you an idea of the health of your system, kind of like a multimeter. Again, you have to be aware that is your system under load or is it sitting idle? I went through Trojan's list on their website, pulling from the state of charge for the Trojan batteries. So the voltages I'm going to use are 14 volts, 12.7 volts, and of course this will differ for your system depending on what kind of batteries you have. 12.5, and then I'm going to use 12.10 at the bottom. And how these lights work, these voltages are actually transition. So if we started at red and the voltage is coming up, when we hit 12.1, it'll trigger and switch to yellow-red. And if the voltage increases to 12.5, it'll trigger again and stay solid yellow. And if we get to 12.7, green, yellow, and if we get to 14, it'll be green and charged. So I kind of split the difference here between the float voltage and the absorption voltage for the green light. We'll go ahead and hit next here. These are the parameters you can watch for your logging. I'm going to do a separate video on this, but I'll go ahead and check these all now. The IP address, we're going to go ahead and stick with a static IP address. We're going to go ahead and change the name here. We'll put in here comms prepper. And we'll go ahead and hit next. I'm not going to load any email information in here. That'll be the topic of a separate video. The email is linked to this feature, enable notification. You can actually pull items out of your logging to get an email if you hit certain trigger thresholds or voltages, a low voltage, high voltage, low PV array voltage. There's a whole table of things that you can set up these notifications, and there's actually 4 of them. But we'll do another video on that. Okay, so we're ready to program the unit. We've created our tables here for position 8 for charging our battery bank out at the retreat location, and we're going to go ahead and hit the program button. It's asking for the IP address. That's the correct IP address, so we're going to hit write and start writing to the unit. It takes a little longer to write than it does to read, but I've got network activity on the Ethernet jack inside the charge controller. Sorry guys, I didn't set up the second camera so you can actually see that happening, but it's programming. And it programmed successfully. So the charge controller is programmed. So another nice feature is I can actually write this to a file and save it. Should I ever lose my configuration in the charge controller or have to buy another one, you can actually save this file and leave it on your computer and load it later. So I'm going to go ahead and save this out to the desktop, and I'll put charge controller 1 and hit save. And now I have that file out here. And we'll go ahead and close this program. The charge controller is charged. One thing the tech support people did tell me is after you program it, you want to disconnect power completely from the charge controller and reconnect it so it can restart. So we just did that. We'll go ahead and exit. And that completes video number 3 in the series on the Morningstar charge controller. And we'll get this installed this weekend and make some more videos. And as always, thank you for watching my videos and subscribing to my channel. This has been the Comms Prepper with another video on the TS-MPPT-60 charge controller. Bye guys.